Okay, hi students. This is Dr. Denicola, and I'm here with a guest today. This is Dr. Erin Harmeyer. She is a faculty member here at LSU in the School of Social Work. She is the director of our Child and Family Studies program. So Erin is not a social worker, but she is a child development expert. And so I have her here today to talk to us about her experiences that she's had before she was an academic, and her advice for new social workers like you who may want to work with young children and their families in their practice. So, thank you for joining me today, Erin.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Denicola, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, great. So, why don't we get started by you sharing with us what did you do before you were an academic?
Yeah, I took sort of a non-traditional route to academia in that when I was an undergrad, I actually studied journalism and human development and family science. I had an interest in supporting children and families, and the way that I sort of thought that I would do that was to be a reporter writing about children and families. And so I had the opportunity while I was a student to be an education reporter. And so I wrote a lot about the different educational things that were going on in the town that I went to my undergrad for, and just kind of realized in the process that I wanted to have a little bit more of an applied role within education, specifically within educational reform and thinking about educational equity, and ended up deciding to apply for an alternative route to teaching following my graduation, and started teaching after that, and taught second grade and fifth grade for a while.
Okay, great. Um, and so you mentioned equity, and
Mhm.
so tell me a little bit more about that. What did you notice in your teaching about equity?
Yeah, I had noticed actually, even first in my reporting, I had done lots of background reading on different opportunities for children, and just realizing how different school districts were really able to provide different things for kids. And so I was really sort of troubled by the way that kids are not getting an equal education in the United States. And I wanted to know more about that. I wanted to play a more applied role in working towards educational equity. And so I did work in a school district with predominantly low income students, um, and realized a lot of kind of what I had been learning in terms of lack of opportunities for students that I wanted to know more about, and wanted to provide more support for students who were not getting equitable access to educational opportunities.
Okay, awesome. Um, so now that you are in academia, when you went back to grad school, you've done some research in this area. So tell us a little bit about the research that you've been a part of on parenting practices for young children, so birth to 8.
Yeah, definitely. When I went back to graduate school, I was really interested in learning more about early childhood because, as I mentioned, most of my time teaching was in second grade, and I was realizing that my students had had different opportunities in those even earlier years. So some of them, it seemed, had access to high quality pre-K programs or supports when they were younger, and they were reading chapter books and loving school and performing at this really high level. And then other students were really struggling with basic letters and letter sounds. And it became kind of obvious that they hadn't had some of those opportunities. And so when I went back to graduate school, I really wanted to know more about what kinds of programs should we be providing, especially for low income children, to ensure that when they start school, they have the skills they need to succeed and they really love school. And so I looked at different programs, and then I also kind of looked at parenting practices and ways that we could support parents as well. So one project that I was involved in, and quite a few of the projects I was involved with, really looked at different parenting practices, and specifically autonomy supportive parenting. Um, this autonomy supportive idea is really this notion of parents kind of allowing children to explore their own interests while they provide that supportive background. And it aligns with what's known as self-determination theory, a theory by DC and Ryan that says that in order for us as humans, whether that's children or adults, to feel intrinsically motivated, we really need to have a sense of autonomy. And we also need to feel competent and a sense of relatedness. And so I was really interested in that autonomy piece and how we provide that autonomy support so that children do feel intrinsically motivated. And when we think specifically about early childhood, we really want kids who are motivated to do the things that help them learn and grow. And in those years, that's to play. And so some of the research that I looked at, we were looking at autonomy supportive parenting practices and then associating that later on with children's cognitive skills or school readiness. And the way we looked at autonomy supportive parenting practices was to look at videos of parents interacting with toddlers. And what the task is called is the 3-bag task, where parents will sit down with a child and they're given these kind of open-ended instructions of, here's 3 different toys, play with them with your child for 10 minutes. And what the researchers are looking at is the way that the parent and child interact around those toys. So is the child kind of freely exploring? They open one bag that has the kitchen set, and are they engaged in playing, or is the parent saying, no, 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 we have to do this one first? And even though the child's showing interest in something else, is the parent kind of driving them towards what the parent, quote unquote, thinks the child should be interested in? And so,
Really interesting observational measure. So,
yeah,
for my students who might not be familiar with this type of measure, how do you get the results from it? So, are you coding different interactions? Is that, do you end
yeah,
up with numbers as your data, or
yes.
do you end up with descriptions as your data?
Yeah. Yeah, it was numeric data, and I didn't actually code the data. So I was doing a secondary analysis of what's known as the Early Head Start Research and Evaluation Project. So that's a big longitudinal study, 17 sites, 3,000 participants. So there's a lot of data. And what the coders had done was a numeric scale of 1 to, I think, 7 on autonomy support. And they have a very specific set of behaviors that they're looking for in order to code that.
So good. So this is an example of a measure that when you look at it, it looks like a qualitative measure because you're
Mhm.
looking at observations. And when we talk about qualitative research, we usually tell students it's words and it's about descriptions.
Mhm.
And just at first glance, that looks like a qualitative instrument, but it's really a quantitative instrument because it ends up having numerical data that you can use in data analysis. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. That's exactly how it was done. And the findings, show that the autonomy supported parenting practices are really important for kids' cognitive and socio-emotional outcomes. And so for parents being able to kind of let children drive the play agenda, or, demonstrate things that they're interested in, and parents play that more supportive role rather than saying, you know, this is what you're playing with. Or if they're playing, holding flashcards in front of them and saying, tell me what color this is, tell me what word this is, that those more autonomy supported practices are really important.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a bit of a personal question. So, my students don't know this about you, but I do since we're colleagues and friends, but that you are a new mom, that you
Yeah.
just had your second baby 4 weeks ago. Yeah.
5 weeks now.
So
Yeah.
you're a rock star agreeing to do this with me. I imagine you agreed because you need adult time, and
Yeah.
this sounded exciting for adult time.
Yes.
So what is how has parenthood contributed now, the lived experience of it, to what you've known through your research about autonomy autonomy supported parenting?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think what I've realized is, it's weird to study parenting and then become a parent and look back. It's like, I know these things, but it is really hard to do the hard work of parenting day in and day out. And so we know these ideals of like, I should support autonomy, or I shouldn't do this. And I guess what I'm realizing is there's no perfect parent and you don't make the perfect decision in every moment, but you can try to just look at it holistically of I want to provide support for children's autonomy most of the time, and I'm going to do my best to do that without
Yeah, the
fretting.
80% rule. 80%
Yes.
of the time, and good enough is good enough.
Yes, exactly. And then, sometimes you just, for instance, it's quicker for me to just zip up your jacket right now, and I'm just going to do that. And knowing that, I will try when I have the patience and the time not to do that, but also sometimes I'm just not going to do the perfect thing.
Great. Thank you for sharing about that.
Yeah.
So, my last question for you is really about social work. So, since you're not a social worker yourself, what kind of experiences have you had with social workers or not had with social workers, especially when you were working in the school system? And then
Yeah.
also, what do you recommend for social work students to do
Yeah.
to prepare for this practice with young children?
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, when I was teaching, we didn't have a school social worker assigned on site full time. And so I never really got the chance to interact with the school social worker. But I do know some school social workers from my personal life who I know make such a big difference in the buildings that they're in. And so my hope is to see more schools ensure that they have that access to school social workers, because I think they're a critical resource for students and also for teachers who don't have the expertise in social work that you all do. For students who want to be a school social worker or want to work with children in any capacity, I definitely recommend, if you can find the space in your schedule, to take some child development coursework. I've had social work students in my child development courses in the past, and they've always been really great students, and I think have been able to make clear connections about, I think I could use this in my practice this way. And so I love to see social work students engaged in child development content in that way.
Okay, awesome. And are there any kind of volunteer experiences or things like that that you might recommend?
Yeah, definitely. Some students end up taking my child development course on campus and they get the opportunity to observe at the LSU Early Childhood Laboratory Education Preschool. And that's a great way to observe these kind of high quality interactions between caregivers and children. But you mentioned volunteering, and there's lots of great opportunities to do that. I've had students in courses volunteer with Boys and Girls Club of Greater Baton Rouge or other organizations in town. And you don't have to be part of a course to do that. They're oftentimes looking for volunteers, and that gives you the experience of working with children that I think is really beneficial when you are trying to learn more about child development, is to get those kind of hands-on experiences.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to help me to show my students what these concepts look like in real life and in their practice. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right.